Hello viewers and welcome to this video. And on this video I'm going to be ranking the albums. I'm going to be ranking the albums by the Brecker Brothers, which are one of the great jazz rock, jazz fusion bands of all time, and one of my favourite bands, and they never made a bad album. But they nearly did. Right, so I'm going to rank those albums. I haven't done a ranking for ages, and I was sat there this morning thinking, there's no more jazz rock bands to rank. I haven't ranked Cassiopeia, but I don't really know much about them, and I haven't ranked Passport, but these are all bands I don't know that much about, so don't ask for it. You know, the Dixie Dregs are really begging, and I do like the Dixie Dregs, but again, I don't know their stuff, so that's going to require me to go off and do some listing, right? And I will do that. But in the Brecker Brothers case, we're talking about one of my favourite jazz rock, jazz fusion bands of all time, right? I'm going to look at 8 albums. We're only going to look at the studio albums, but I have put a live album in, and you probably guess which one, and it's because it's amazing and it had to go in. It's an essential purchase. The other live albums you don't need to get, but that album, if you're into the Brecker Brothers, you're going to have to get. So we'll get to that in a little minute. Let's tell you a little bit about the Brecker Brothers. The Brecker Brothers were brothers. Randy Brecker, who played trumpet, who was born in 1945, and Michael Brecker, who played saxophone, tenor saxophone and soprano saxophone, and Iwi, and that is the universal sign for Iwi. And he was born in 1949. Michael Brecker sadly died, I think, from leukemia in 2007 at a relatively young age. Randy Brecker is one of the great modern trumpet players and a virtuoso who can play everything from straight jazz right to like funk, you know, soul and heavy fusion. This guy could really play. He can still really play, and he's wonderful. One of my favourite trumpet players with almost classical level technique. I was told that by a trumpet player once. Michael Brecker is perhaps the greatest saxophone player of the last 50 years. An absolute icon. When I think of a soloist, you know, Coltrane, Charlie Parker, Sonny Rollins, and then when we get to the fusion period, who are the truly incredible soloists of that period? You know, you got Chick Corea, you got John McLaughlin, all those people. I would put at the top in terms of actual solo, I would put Keith Jarrett, I would think, would go to the top of my list, and Michael Brecker. I think Michael Brecker may be the greatest actual improvising soloist of the 1970s and 80s. Without this is an absolute. He's a monster. He changed all of saxophone playing, right? He's got a sound and an approach. Everyone sounds like Brecker now. Well, they don't all sound like Brecker. Don't want to get into that argument. Right, so they came to the fore in the music industry in the late 60s, early 70s. They were in a band called Dreams, and Dreams also featured Billy Cobham, pre-Mahavishnu Orchestra, and they were pushing a sound that was related to the jazz rock stuff that was just happening at that time, but also plugging into that sound that came out of Blood, Sweat and Tears and Chicago and Chase, and even to some extent Don Ellis Band, that sort of brass heavy fusion. There is a huge love of Blood, Sweat and Tears in Chicago on this. You know, they're forever telling me how great those early albums are, and I know it, you know. So, but for me, that brass heavy fusion sound was just personified by the Brecker Brothers. When Billy Cobham leaves the Mahavishnu Orchestra in 1973, he forms his own band. He does Spectrum whilst in the Mahavishnu Orchestra. His first solo album, once he's at the Mahavishnu Orchestra, is Crosswinds, and it features the Brecker Brothers. They make a run of albums. They make, I didn't know I'm going to talk about this, Crosswinds, Total Eclipse, Shabazz, Funky Thide of Sings. Have I missed one out? And they all feature the Brecker Brothers. It's like the Brecker Brothers. I haven't considered the Cobham albums, but if you're a Brecker Brothers fan, you need to consider those albums, and I will talk about at the end of the video. In 1975, after they'd made Funky Thide of Sings with Billy Cobham, they did their first solo album, and they had a run of solo albums up until the early 80s, and then they went and did their own thing, and Brecker did some incredible solo albums, and then they returned in the early 90s with a couple of albums, and that's as far as I'm going. There has since been a number of live albums come out, I'm not counting those. We're looking at the classic Brecker Brothers albums, but I am including the 2 from the early 90s. What else do I need to say? The Brecker Brothers became go-to brass session. They work with Frank Sinatra. They work with Frank Zappa. Their work on Zappa in New York is incredible. Brecker's saxophone solo on the Purple Lagoon is just unbelievable. So to really get your head around it, you need to go and check all this stuff out. You need to go and listen to Paul Simon, Still Crazy After All These Years, and hear Brecker incredible in that commercial context. And then go and listen to something like the Purple Lagoon, where he's out there. This could do everything. And this is the thing you get with the Brecker Brothers. When you buy a Brecker Brothers album, what you get is this certain style of fusion, which is brass heavy. There's a lot of sort of bebop-esque complex unison lines going on. It's incredibly funky and it's incredibly tight and it's incredibly complex and it's incredibly intense. But also, being 1975, they're looking for that hit. So they are also making these funky disco-y songs, right? Now, for some people, this undermines these albums, and it's quite a troublesome thing. And on this ranking, I'm going to try and go through and pick this apart. They have this tendency to go towards commerciality. Now, the truth is, a lot of the times, these commercial funky songs that on any other fusion album would be awful. They're really good at it, and they are really funky, and I love the funk, and I like a lot of the vocal stuff, but it does pull these albums down. And I do think that they never have really made an album where we go, this is an absolute fusion classic, because the fusion audience are put off by these funky disco tracks on there. And this is a shame, because the style they sort of personified, this style, perhaps, when you look at modern bands like Wolfpack, or you look at bands like especially Snarky Puppy and all these modern fusion bands, when you hear a modern fusion band, they don't sound so much like Return to Forever or Tony Williams' Lifetime or Mavish Nuksha. They sound like the Brecker Brothers. The style they personified won out. This is a really important band and they do not get the dues. And some of the stuff on here is some of the best fusion you'll ever hear, and almost personifies the best of what jazz, rock and jazz fusion is. So I'm going to start and go through this and try and pick up these points as we go. So right at number 8 is a great album. All these albums are great. At number 8 I have their last album that came out I think in 1994, and it's called Out of the Loop. It was a follow-up to the return of the Brecker Brothers, which obviously I'm going to talk about in a bit. Out of the Loop isn't quite up to the same standards of Return to the Brecker Brothers for me. And the thing that really kills it for me is the clues in the title. This came out in the early 90s. You'd had like hip hop come out, dance music come out, and then you'd had like Guru Jazzmatazz, you'd had like Red Hot and Cool, you'd had like Ronnie Jordan, and hip hop had sort of been embraced by the jazz world, and there was some really cutting edge people, especially people on M-Bass, that were mixing those two things together. The Brecker Brothers, they're up with this, and by 1984 this has almost become a cliche, and they make an album full of loops, and it's a good album and there's some great tracks. If you go back and listen to it now, because they are cutting edge when it comes to making sort of contemporary electronic loop based music, some of the samples and loops are very, very dated. Some of them aren't. Some of it's very listenable. It never gets out of the gear. You know, the Brecker Brothers, you can often think they're like sort of a bit Fusaki. They're not. It's fiery, intense stuff, but not on this album. There's some good stuff on there. The track Good When It Was is a great track, and I like the production on there. And on the track Harpoon, they dig a little bit deeper. It's by no means a bad album. If I put it on the car, I would really enjoy it. But that's what I've got at number 8 is Out of the Loop. At number 7, I have Strap Hanging, which I think was the last album they made in the original, you know, sort of 70s, 80s incarnation. Strap Hanging is a really, really good album with some great compositions. It's the one album where they don't give in to trying to make some disco record or some vocal track. You know, they don't do that on this album. And when I was going to rank this, I thought Strap Hanging was a really good, solid album. But when I went back and listened to it, the fieriness and excitingness of the Brecker Brothers, the thing I love, that spinning out of control, you know, million miles an hour with all this, you know, all that thing, and it's all coming at you, and the drums are so tight and funky, and yet they're expressive, all that thing. Strap Hanging's a bit pulled in for me, and I think it's because, I think was it made 1982, 83, something like that. it's the 80s that kicked in, and for an 80s fusion album, it's great. It's a really great album. There's some great soloing on it. You've got the track Not Ethiopia, which has ended up in the real book, so it's become a bit of a jazz standard, and there's a credible version of that on, I think, Truth in Shredding by Alan Holdsworth and Frank Gambale. That's become a bit of a jazz standard. This is a great album. It's just a little bit down. It's a little bit mellow. So that's what I've got at number 7, sorry. At number 6, we got the album that came before that, Detente, right? Now, Detente has got some incredible stuff on there. There's a track called Squish, which is a classic, you know, Brecker Brothers tune. It's a little bit more aggressive in places than Strap Hangin'. It's a lot more funkier than Strap Hangin', but the first sort of side is dominated by them really trying to get a hit record, and there's a ton of vocal tracks which are erring on the side of cheesiness. Some of their vocal tracks can be great and really funky and really enjoyable, but these aren't so much. They've got some guy on vocals who's singing really, really high all the time. That's from what I can remember. There's a track on here called Don't Get Funny With Money. Now, this is the worst thing about the Brecker Brothers, is when Randy Brecker sings. And there's a part of me that wants to like it, because Randy Brecker comes on and he sort of writes lyrics that are quite, they're sort of, he takes the mickey out himself. They're quite funny lyrics. He's not got a great voice. And good on him for getting up, you know, on an album with the best musicians in the world, the best producers in the world, and sticking his voice, even though he's got Luther Vandross, whoever it is behind him, backing him up, that he feels confident enough to go and sing his song, you know. But when I hear it, it's like, at some point, I'm going to make an album of all the songs where Randy Brecker sung. I want to hear them as a whole. They might all pull together into something wonderful. But it's this quirky, weird world we go in. You could tell I'm not convinced whether it is truly awful. There's a part of me that really, really likes these songs. But by the same token, when that one comes in, I go, oh, God. But maybe you need that as a... I don't know. I didn't know. But the best tracks, like Squish on here, is prime Brecker Brothers. So that's what I got at number 6. At number 5, I've got the return of the Brecker Brothers. So the Brecker Brothers disappeared, like I said, around about 1982-3. They weren't in existence. They were still playing together. They were still doing sessions together. Michael Brecker started to make solo albums. He didn't make a solo album until I think about 1985 with his self-titled solo album, which is an incredible album. And that's much more straighter jazz, but it's still fusiony. You know, that and, you know, there's a run of Michael Brecker albums that are absolutely incredible. In 1992, they returned, and I actually really love this album. And partly this is my own personal choice, because how old was I then? I was 24 years old. I was heavily into my jazz rock and jazz fusion, and then there's an announcement that the Brecker Brothers are coming back, right? Mavish Junction never came back in the 90s. I think Return to Forever, we're going to do it a bit later on. Weather Report had gone. So to have the Brecker Brothers come back was incredible, and I rushed out and bought that album. And the opening track came up, Song for Barry, and it wasn't some weird disco song. It wasn't loads of hip-hop loops. It was proper Brecker Brothers, heavy jazz, heavy playing, and it was almost like world music. Song for Barry is one of their best songs of all time. There are moments on this where the loops do come out, I think in the King of the Lobby and all that stuff, but it was 92 and it was a fresher thing to do, and I didn't have a problem with those tracks at the time. I wouldn't listen so much now. But there's a track on there called Above and Below, and it's prime Brecker Brothers. We've got Dennis Chambers on drums, and you really feel that on this album there's a band playing. You don't get it without the loop. Return of the Brecker Brothers is a great album, and in 1992 it was a great fusion album. It was wonderful. They brought a video out of them playing somewhere in Spain, I think, or something, and I bought that as well. And that video was incredible, and they did skunk funk on it, and you got Mike Stern on guitar, Chambers on drums, James Genius on bass. It was an incredible band. So Return of the Brecker Brothers at number 5, right? Now we're going to do the run. We're now going to the 70s, and we're going to do the run of the last 4. So at number 4, I have Back to Back, which was their second album. When they emerged in 75, like I said, they ploughed this sound, which we'd sort of heard before a little bit on Funky Thide of Things, and it was this very complex, intense sound that I really have difficulty trying to describe here. But it's a seminal sound in terms of jazz rock. But on Back to Back, we have some incredible examples of vintage 70s Brecker Brothers. We have Night Flight, incredible. Fast, Furious Brecker Brothers. They brought a single out called Slick Stuff, and that's the example of them doing their thing, their commercial funky really well. I just love that when they do it well and it's really funky. A lot of these fusion bands that were trying to make disco and funk records, I don't think these guys really got it, and they ended up making middle of the road. They sort of saw the pop commerciality in the melodies, and they didn't hit hard enough. They didn't sound like Chic, or didn't sound like Earth, Wind and Fire. The Brecker Brothers are about as funky as it gets, and Slick Stuff is funky, but Back to Back is marred with a few excursions a bit towards the cheesy side. The best bits on there, incredible. And we also have this lovely, tight 70s funky production, and I absolutely love. They personify it. I've talked about the John Serry album on my channel a number of times at Exhibition, and that personifies that sort of funky, intense, complex yet grooving sound, and there's a whole bunch of albums that I really love at this period, but the Brecker Brothers personify it, and it's on Back to Back. We don't hear it so much on Strap Hanging, and it's not on Out of the Loop or Detente. Detente's got somewhat. So that's what I've got at number 4 is Back to Back. At number 3 I have Don't Stop the Music. Now Don't Stop the Music contains a tune called Finger Licking Good. And Finger Licking Good is just awful. It's absolutely awful. It's the opening track, I think, on the album, on Don't Stop the Music. It sounds like it's off an advert. But I don't get the feeling they're talking about eating Kentucky Fried Chicken on this track. I don't know what is Finger Licking Good. I just don't even want to go there. It's the most trite, awful track, and this is a terrible thing because Don't Stop the Music is an incredible album, and I was going to rank it lower because of Finger Licking Good, but it has Squids on it, and Squids is an absolute classic jazz rock track, absolute classic, and it has at the end the epic Tabula Rasa, and it's that track that elevates it above Back to Back. There's a part of me, these two albums are very close to each other, and Back to Back, if Tabula Rasa was just another 5-minute cool Brecker Brothers track, I'd probably put Back to Back higher, but Tabula Rasa just raises it up. Squids as well, it just raises it up that little bit more. What we can see here is a pattern that these albums are incredible. Honestly, if you were just to take a couple of the intense tracks off say Don't Stop the Music and stick it on Back to Back and swap it around, we would be pointing at this album and going, this is one of the great albums. This is like In a Mountain Flame, it's like Heavy Weather, it's like Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy. It would be in that. It should be there. It's so nearly there. When I did my top 10 fusion albums, I don't think I put a Brecker Brothers album in, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason why I'm not thinking. But in terms of when they're at their best, they're equal and probably above all these other bands. They're more intense than Weather Report, And some of the compositions, Tabula Rasa is an example of this. It's almost like Return to Forever, it's so intense. At number 2, I have the debut album, the Brecker Brothers. Here's the sound. It's wonderful. It's tight. They come here. They do skunk funk on here. They do sponge. They do rocks. These are all classic. If you were doing the best of the Brecker Brothers, a lot of them would come off this album. You've got Oh My Stars. Another Randy Brecker vocals. I'd wipe this from my memory that he does it on the first album. When I bought this as a kid and I thought this album was wonderful, I must have just skipped off that so much, and then I went back and listened to those albums again to do this ranking, and I don't think I'd even listened to it properly, and I sat and listened to Oh My Stars, and it's absolutely awful. I think when it comes to Randy Brecker songs, I was going to mention this when we got to the Return of the Brecker Brothers, because this track really pulls Return of the Breckers, but there's a track on there called That's All There Is. And on that track, Randy Brecker actually puts the picture in your mind of somebody rubbing him down with body lotion. It's in the lyric. And I imagine Randy Brecker's quite a hairy man, and I don't imagine he's that slim. And the picture he paints in my mind, I'm very uncomfortable with. And these songs, Oh My Stars is pretty rough as well, but I think the worst is That's All There Is. I've got Randy Brecker's solo album, Toe to Toe, and that is it goes even darker and deeper into this world of the Randy Brecker vocal song. I will do a video called When Jazz Rock Stars Sing, because it has to be done. I just don't want to fill it with Randy Brecker. You know, but then you got Tony Williams as well. He's vying for a place on that list. So the Brecker Brothers, the single off that, which I think was relatively successful, is called Sneaking Up Behind You. And if you look on the album cover, even though it's just called the Brecker Brothers, you can see, I think it says that on the front, or is that Don't Stop the Music? I think that's Don't Stop the Music. I've gone wrong there, but I've corrected myself. I won't have to correct it in the comments. Anyway, shall we just move off this one to get to number one? Now, number one's a live album. And you know what it is? It's Heavy Metal Bebop. Heavy Metal Bebop is unbelievable. And I think that's the one that made my 10 greatest prog albums. It definitely made the top 20. Heavy Metal Bebop is a live album except for one track. It opens up with the incredible East River. And East River I absolutely love. A great groove, great production, and a great hook. See, a lot of jazz rock artists, they don't know how to write a hook. The Brecker Brothers do, and then here they've got a great hook. I love that sound. And although it's funky, it's just epic. In that big gang vocal when they all shout, I absolutely love it. And the tasty guitar playing on there. Absolute classic commercial Brecker Brothers. The best one they ever did is on Heavy Metal Bebop. Then we move to the live stuff. The Brecker Brothers live, they stretch out. Let us say, they definitely stretch out when they play live. They both play through a lot of electronics, and it's absolutely mind-blowing what's happening in terms of the electronics. The X factor for this is it's not got Steve Gadd on there or Harvey Mason. Brilliant drummers, but it has the mighty Terry Bozzio, and it's perhaps Terry's greatest drum performance as well. And Terry Bozzio is one of my famous drummers. He takes the Brecker Brothers and he locates the arse of Randy Brecker, and he locates the arse of Michael Brecker, and he kicks it as hard as he can. He just boots it into the stratosphere. It's absolutely incredible. Some of the most intense fusion playing of all time is on here, and Skunk Funk, because Skunk Funk's the famous Brecker Brothers track, and we've got 3 definitive versions. We've got the one that's on the Billy Cobham album, Funky Side of Things. We've got the one that's the classic one on the first album, but the one you're going to listen to is the live one on here. It's just off the scale. So at number 1 I have Heavy Metal Bebop. I'm going to tell you, all these albums are fantastic. If you're a fusion fan, you need the lot. And although I've been critical of them, you've got to realise I've been critical of them inside the world of the Brecker Brothers. There's tracks on every one of these. It's absolutely wonderful. But if you really want to just go for one, it's Heavy Metal Bebop. You get the best of them being commercial, and you get the best of Randy Brecker and especially Michael Brecker just being 2 of the greatest jazz rock or jazz or improvising soloists in history. It's wonderful stuff. I'm going to add on to this list, if you have all those albums, you need to go and get Funky Side of Things by Billy Cobham. It's the last of the sort of Billy Cobham Brecker Brothers band. Crosswind's one of the greatest albums ever made. Total Eclipse is one of the greatest albums ever made. Shabazz is just an out there, jazz rock album. Funky Side of Things often gets demoted in that list. I've gone back and listened to it again today, and I don't know why. It's got Schofield on there and guitar. He's playing absolutely incredible. But there's some amazing stuff on Funky Side of Things. And one thing I learned that really shocked me is there's a track called Sorcery. And that track sounds like a Billy Cobham track. Billy Cobham always has that sort of riff. That sort of riff. It sounds like an utter Billy Cobham track. I never checked my album to see who'd written it. Looking at it today, you know, just for this video, I saw Keith Jarrett and I thought, that's a mistake. It's not, that's the Billy Cobham track. And I've got the Keith Jarrett Sorcery as well. I've got that track. It's on the Keith Jarrett anthology, which could well be up here, but I can't see it. Yeah, here. So I'll pull it out. I'm doing an album on the Brecker Brothers. I'm talking about Billy Cobham. I'm showing you Keith Jarrett album. So here on this album, we have the track Sorcery. I can't see it. Oh yes, Sorcery, which he did with Charles Lloyd. It's a very early track. This shows where Cobham's ears were when he was made. No, the Keith Jarrett version is incredible. It's a beautiful tune, beautiful bit of writing. It's from that period before he went to ECM, when there's a little bit more guts, and it's got that sort of signature Keith Jarrett piano riff. When you transfer it into the Billy Cobham band, it's absolutely incredible. This is absolutely fusion at its best. Panhandler, one of Cobham's best tunes. There is a track on the end called something Modes. I've made a note of it here because I knew I wouldn't remember it. Moody Modes, which was composed by Milko Liviev, who was the keyboardist of the band, absolutely brilliant European pianist. And it's a mighty fusion track, a real epic. And in this band, you've got Alex Blake. Alex Blake was one of the sort of early fusion players. He played with Cobham and he also played with Lenny White. I've never took that much notice, but researching into Alex Blake, he actually started off with Sun Ra, and he plays a double bass solo. And I'm still not sure whether it's Stanley Clarke, but it's Stanley Clarke virtuoso level. But it's not Stanley Clarke, and he's playing Paragon. It's somewhere between Matt Garrison and Stanley Clarke. This double bass solo is incredible. I never noticed it when I was a kid. And I think it's Alex Blake, so I'm giving props to Alex Blake. I don't even know if he's alive, but hopefully there's someone out there might go, I know Alex Blake and he's out there, so send him, you know, my best wishes. This starts happening on the channel. People go, I know that person. I send them the love. I was sat there this morning, listening to Cobham album, and just for the first time going, what is this double bass? Absolutely incredible. So if you want to get an album, we've got all these, you want to get another Brecker Brothers album, go get Funky Thigh Things. So I think I'm at the end of the video. I've done a ranking video. I haven't done one for ages. I enjoyed that. Well, I'm going to have to do some research. I'm going to have to go and listen to the Dixie Dregs. I'm going to have to listen to Passport. I'm going to have to listen to Cassiopeia. You know why I don't do it? Because I know if I do those videos, they won't get the views. I don't think this one will get the views. It's a shame because it's where we started. If it doesn't get the views, and the other videos that I put on up this week that are much more clickbaity, I might have to deal with this on the channel, and it will be like a subtle. You'll be all getting a subtle telling off, but not you lot, because you came and watched this video. You're the proper jazz, rock, and fusion fans. But these fair weather people who only turn up when I'm talking about something that's a bit, you know, I don't like pushing all these buttons. But I have to keep the algorithm up. Keith Jarrett, Billy Cobham, the Brecker Brothers, the legends, the greats, the gods. You know, they're all still with us except for Michael Brecker. They're all still with us. Treasure them. Go and listen to their music. Absolutely incredible. If you like this video, like it, because it helps the algorithm. If you want to see more, then go and click the subscribe and the notification bell. If you like ranking videos, go and have a look. I've got nearly 500 videos on here, and people are now saying, why don't you do a video on so-and-so? And I go, I have. And then someone says, why didn't you do a video on Larry Carriel? I have. I've done everybody, right? So go and have a look through the back cat. They go all the way back. I might have to start revisiting it, because if you go back to the early videos, my style wasn't fully developed. It was a lot more me talking to the camera like that, and just talking like that, and I've relaxed a lot over the years, so I might go back and do. I want to do another Mavish Nocturne and really do it in my more relaxed style that I have now, my more conversational style. I got serious then about my work. If you do want to support my wonderful work here, right, then you can become a Patreon, and you will love it there. So go and click on that and go and support me on Patreon. If Patreon's not for you, then you can also support me by sticking a little bit of money in my tip jar, which is down there, my YouTube, Andy Edwards YouTube PayPal tip jar. It's very straightforward. It just sucks the money out of you and sticks in my PayPal. All right, and then, you know, when I'm going up the shop to get cat food, I go, you know, I'll treat myself to a nice packet of Rich Tea biscuits, I think. I'm a hardcore biscuit connoisseur. You know, anyone who's checked out my video on biscuits, and the Rich Tea biscuit is really going up in my estimation. It really is not to be approached by the amateur, but if you're a professional aficionado of biscuits, then the Rich Tea one is. And they cost money. I mean, I think you talked about 60p for a packet of Rich Tea biscuits. And although when you go to my PayPal, there is a promise on there that I will not spend the money that you send me on biscuits. You can't begrudge me 60p on some Rich Tea biscuits, can you really? You can't begrudge me such a thing. So if you're sat in there planning to begrudge me right now, you know, if you say, I might put some money in Andy's tip jar, but I feel like I want to begrudge him because he's going to spend it on biscuits. And why should I give him my money, my hard-earned money? You know, he's a musician. What's he done all his life? He's sat on his arse in the back of bands playing on stage, right? He talks a bit to camera on YouTube, and then he just goes around teaching people music. I mean, that's nothing. I've got a proper job. I'm sat behind a desk 10 hours a day earning my money, and he wants me to pass my money on to him so that he can buy himself biscuits. Who's going to buy my biscuits? Is he thinking of my biscuits and my, you know, my biscuit habits when he's asked for money? He's there begging. He's begging, he is. He's begging on YouTube. Begging for money. We're supposed to just drop money. Why doesn't he just go downtown, right, and get his little pot and stick it in front of him, put a little sign up saying, I need biscuits, and see if anyone's going to drop some money in his pot then. And he can talk as much as he likes about jazz rock then, but I don't think it's going to go down that well. People will think he's bonkers, going on about, you know, the 11th House and Hatfield and the North to anybody that comes along. I mean, and the thing is, as I get older, my trade is becoming being a YouTuber. This is what I'm doing. I'm sat here being a YouTuber, and if the internet ever goes down, I will have to go out and ply this trade in the general public, which is a terrifying thought. I've just realised it. The idea of going, right, the internet's gone, YouTube's gone, it got taken over, and now you can't put anything up unless it conforms to all these rules, and I can't do my YouTubes anymore because I had humour on there, and the humour's not allowed in the modern world. So, you know, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to go out and plough my YouTube skills to the wider public. I'm going to have to set up stall out there in the wind and the rain, shouting at anybody who comes back, "Hi, what do you think the best 11th House album is?" You know, a lot of people, they think it's introducing the 11th House, but I would go for Level 1 as being the best of them, really. And Aspects has got some very good stuff, although it does succumb to the Brecker Brothers thing of trying to, you know, I could be shouting. I mean, it's not going to work, is it? And I'm frightened as I get older. I'm frightened of this happening. I'm frightened. And what am I going to do? What's my skill? I'm not a plumber. I'm not an electrician. I don't know about how to rip people off buying and selling houses and all that stuff. I can't do any of that. Right? I'm getting too old to play the drums. My hands are getting all old, and you know, what am I going to do? So I might rename that tip jar the Andy Edwards retirement plan, which is what it is. So if I'm going to retire on it, you're going to have to stick a little bit more in than 50p. Think about it. You know, think about it, what it's like for me with my rubbish skill set that I've acquired over the last 50 years. Think about it. It's not easy where your main skill is knowing about jazz, rock and prog. And that's all I've got. That's all I've got. I didn't cut it as a drummer. You know, I played a load of bands but never made any money out of it. But nobody ever did in this business, you know. Believe it, all your heroes. You know, you sit there, think they're sat there in their mansions. They're not, you know. They've all got their little teaching posts and their little house that they rent out and take the rent for it or whatever it is that keeps them going. It's an incredible thing. I'm in deep thought now. 34 minutes. Shall we call it a day? Shall we call it a day on this ranking video? I've creased me Gladys Knight and the Pips album. It happened in the other video when I turned round, you know, because I'm having to make a little bit of money from product placement now, so I'm just going to turn around and put this back in. Carrigan Events, it's the best place for you to get an event done. See, Steve, that'll be what was I going to charge you? £6.50 for that, Steve Carrigan owns Carrigan Events, so he's got a lot of profile this week from me. When I come to have an event, then I expect Steve to you know, I'm on mates rates without a doubt. Right, I don't want to switch off. I get to this point where I'm in this little mad place. It's a weird thing when you're doing YouTube videos. It's a weird thing. Because I come in here, it's always hard to get going. But once you're in here, once I'm in this zone, you don't want it to end. Once you switch that camera off, you go back to the real world. I don't like the real world. Something like this, it's just too real. I like my pretend YouTube world. Because I think everybody likes me in the pretend YouTube world. But they probably don't. I'm really going for the pathos today. It's probably because I feel a bit guilty about all my product placement that I've been doing. Oh, I'm going to stop now. Andy,